The tension of the Ukraine-Russia war increased significantly in the second week of January. With the last victories of the Kiev army in Donetsk and Luhansk regions, we entered a critical period in the war. We are here again today, with the fierce and hot conflicts on the battlefield. Let's dive right now into the areas of hot breaking points occurring on the front lines of the battlefield. Our first stop is the Donetsk region on the eastern front of Ukraine. We are currently going to Soledar, the city where the hottest conflicts of this region take place. We can see that there is a new situation here every hour. Last night, members of the Wagner group released a video from Soledar. In the video, it was told that the Wagner mercenary group had crossed the defense line in Soledar and reached the salt mine near this area. Also, reports emerged claiming that the Russians had gained fire control over the roads leading to Soledar, began to attack the city from all directions, and that the city was almost about to be captured. Although Russian military bloggers inflated the Russian advance, the Wagner president made the opposite statement, declaring that Soledar could not be captured so easily, despite some tactical gains. This shows us a new break in the Russian army. The fluctuation at such a critical point in the Bakhmut region will shake the dynamite of the Russian army. Other clashes are also taking place in the eastern part of the city. The Ukrainian armed forces developed a similar defense method in this region. Kiev soldiers retreated from the first street to the second street in the eastern settlement of the city of Soledar. Thus, the Ukrainian forces will create a buffer zone and not be exposed to direct fire from Yakovlivka. If we look carefully at the war map, we can see that the invading Russians are controlling the hills here. Russians in Yakovlivka are at an altitude of 180 meters, while Ukrainians in the eastern suburbs are at 120. So the Ukrainians are 60 meters lower than the Russians. The distance from Yakovlivka is around 4 kilometers, so the Russians have very good fire control over the outer streets. It is rumored that the Russians are using various anti-tank systems to hunt Ukrainian tanks in direct view, but it seems that the Moscow army was not very successful in these matters. It is also necessary to look at the mobility in eastern Ukraine in general. Just as Donetsk, the Luhansk region is host to violent conflicts. Let's take a quick look at the latest situation in Luhansk. Russian and Ukrainian forces continued offensive operations near Svatova. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian troops in the northwest of Svatova in the direction of Kupiansk are trying to develop their tactical positions, and Ukrainian troops repelled an attack near Stelmakivka. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that Ukrainian troops attempted to attack Sinkivka. A Russian blogger claimed that Moscow troops were trying to advance on Stelmakivka and Novoselivska. The Ukrainian Resistance Center reported that a Russian engineer and excavator unit has arrived in Svatova to examine options for potentially detonating a nearby reservoir's dam to slow Ukraine's advance in the Svatova region. Russian media most recently showed a BMPT armored combat vehicle in the Svatova region, with personnel who appeared to be wearing the patches of Moscow's Third Corps. While the Russians' preparations in Luhansk continued in this direction, the Kiev forces launched a striking attack yesterday. The Ukrainian armed forces targeted the largest thermal power plant in the DPR. The attack on Starobeshevskaya was carried out using tactical missile weapons of the Ukrainian army and HIMARS missile systems. A few hours after the attacks on the thermal power plant, a heavy blow was dealt to Novye Svet and its surroundings, where the Starobeshevskaya TPP is located. Ukrainian forces severely blockaded the thermal power plant and its surroundings. According to the testimony of residents, Starobeshevskaya TPP, one of the largest power plants in the city, was seriously damaged by successive missile attacks by Ukrainian forces. According to preliminary data from Starobeshevskaya thermal power plant, where the attack took place, Ukrainian artillery units fired 6 HIMARS missiles at this thermal power plant in a row. The damage to this facility, where heavy bombardment took place, has not been clearly disclosed at this time, but according to some eyewitnesses, the explosions were quite violent. Immediately after the HIMARS missile attacks at the thermal power plant in Starobeshevskaya, Ukraine launched attacks on the center of Zugras this time. Ukrainian forces targeted Zugras with Tochka-U tactical missiles. In both attacks, it turned out that a main gas pipeline was blown up in the Luhansk region, as a result of which about 15 subscribers were deprived of their gas supply. The fire that broke out after the HIMARS missile attacks at the thermal power plant in Starobeshevskaya was recorded on video. The flames which caused a great deal of panic in the region, were brought under control with difficulty. Another example of the advance of Ukrainian forces in Luhansk occurred on the Kremenaya front line. The battle of Russian and Ukrainian tank crews near Kremenaya was videotaped. Ukrainian tanks continue to advance in the direction of the city of Kremenaya, where fierce fighting is currently taking place on the border of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Previously, only Ukrainian motorized rifle units and lightly armored vehicles were located here, but the arrival of the tanks of the Kiev army at this front line was a great surprise for the invading Russian troops, because it takes at least 6 to 10 minutes to reach the outskirts of Kremenaya from the battlefield with a heavy armored tank. Russian forces did not expect this move by Ukraine. Thus, tensions increased in this front line. As we mentioned, the confrontation of tanks from both sides of the battle at Kremenaya was videotaped. In the video footage, you can clearly see how the Ukrainian tanks were rushing towards Kremenaya. 2 Russian tanks were advancing along the same front line to meet the Ukrainians. Ukrainian and Russian tanks completely faced each other in an area 6 kilometers from the front line in Kremenaya. It was at this time that a heavy clash began. Currently, the ongoing clash is in favor of Kiev, as the Ukrainian army's tanks have a much better advantage. While Russian and Ukrainian forces continued offensive operations near Kremenaya, the Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian troops attempted to attack near Makivka, Dibrova, and Bilohorivka. A Russian mail blogger noted that the forces of the Moscow army attacked Makivka, and that Makivka and its surroundings are a grey zone. Let's move on to the details of the attack in this area right away. Residents of Makivka reported a series of explosions in the city. The explosions were so strong that car alarms in the city went off en masse. At the same time, no clear statement has been shared about the destruction and victims in this region so far. The striking attacks that took place in Makivka were also videotaped. In the video frames, a very violent explosion occurred immediately after the appearance of a powerful flash. The attack on Makivka took place at around 10 p.m. local time. At the same time, there is no clear information about whether the air defense systems are working in the city, and also with what kind of weapons the attack was carried out. Explosions in Makivka caused particular concern in the city after the Ukrainian armed forces attacked, with the help of HIMARS long-range missile systems, on the vocational school building number 19 in this region, which killed 89 Russian soldiers. The building where this vocational school was located was later destroyed as a result of 4 missiles. Russia, on the other hand, fell into a passive position in the city by getting blows one after another in Makivka. Recently, 400 Russian soldiers were killed in Makivka as a result of HIMARS missile attacks by Ukrainian forces. The situation in Makivka, which has turned into a hell for the Moscow administration, is in shambles until now. It may come as no surprise that the invading troops leave Makivka completely in the coming days. In Luhansk, the Ukrainian forces continue their advance with their latest attacks in Statova and Kremenaya. Russian troops do not seem to have much of a chance in these areas either. In the coming days, we will be in front of you again with what happened on the eastern front of Ukraine.